Welcome to another ABI video. I am Bill Rochelle, Editor-at-Large for American Bankruptcy Institute, and we are coming to you from ABI's annual spring meeting in Washington, D.C. For the next few minutes, we're going to be talking with Alan Beckett, the incoming president of ABI. Alan, in my view, is the country's leading expert on the relationship between consumers and financial institutions, and I got to tell you, it couldn't be more fortunate that she will be guiding the ABI for the next year, because this is the year of the issuance of ABI's commission report on, shall we say, reform of consumer bankruptcy law. So that's what I want to focus on in our discussion the next few minutes with Alan. First off, Alan, let me ask you this question. In this 215-page report that ABI issued a couple of days ago, is it all going to require legislation in Congress for it to become effective?
No, it's not. And in fact, one of our goals was to avoid a report that suggested only legislative changes, because we would all be old and gray before any of them ever got through Congress. So we really tried to work within the current system that we have and to use whatever tools we had at our disposal in order to make recommendations that specifically did not require legislative change. Although there were some that really was the only solution. So we tried to steer away from writing legislation, but we did maybe suggest some language that could be used. And that language was developed by the commissioners that were working on that particular recommendation. But our hope is that a lot of this can be accomplished without any legislative changes.
Well, if you don't have legislative changes, how do you make changes where Congress is not involved?
So some of the tweaks that need to be made to the system really can be done through the Rules Committee. So changes to forms, changes to things that are on forms. And other things are where they might be legislative, understanding that is not something we could ever get done very quickly. We've suggested the best interpretation where there were two different views on a subject matter. So for Bruner, for example, student loan discharge, we have suggested interpretations of Bruner to address the problem of discharging student loans in bankruptcy, while we may or may not be waiting for any legislative changes to how student loans are treated.
I see. Well, God bless you. I hope it works, because consumer law is, to my point of view, a real mess these days, having been made worse so by Congress's legislative changes. But let's hope we all live long enough so that Congress becomes involved as well. To change the topic slightly, Alan, at the opening session, you had a very powerful statement about economic abuse. Tell our audience what it was that you talked about.
So a few years ago, I heard a presentation that was given by Professor Angela Litwin, who is with the University of Texas School of Law, on a phenomenon that she calls coerced debt. And I was so compelled by it that I actually reached out to her. I became friends with her and have presented on this topic with her at other seminars. But I still felt that even though I didn't do the research, I felt compelled enough about the subject matter that I wanted to do.
What is coerced?
Coerced debt is debt that is incurred in the context of a relationship wherein there is domestic violence. So we know that domestic violence can come in physical form, but it can also come in psychological form, and can also come in an economic form, in the form of economic abuse, where one party holds the purse strings to the family and the victim is at that person's mercy. So these are things like taking the victim's paycheck, not letting the victim have access to the bills, so they don't know what bills are out there, so there could be fraudulent accounts in the victim's name that the victim doesn't know about. Economic abuse, is a whole range of things, but specifically I was talking about economic abuse that results in debt being put into the victim's name that could be either done fraudulently or coercively, that the victim is now saddled with. And as we know, a tremendous amount of the violence that happens in abusive relationships happens when a woman is trying to escape the relationship. The one thing she needs to escape is money, is access to resources. And if her credit is ruined, if she's financially dependent on the abusive spouse, she is 75% more likely to stay in the abusive relationship simply because she cannot escape, because she doesn't have resources and doesn't have credit to get them. So my talk was really not to go into too much detail about it, other than to make the audience aware that this exists. There's debtors' attorneys in our audience who work with these folks. There are lawyers in our audience who can volunteer at domestic abuse facilities, and just a sensitivity to this type of domestic violence, which really often doesn't have outward signs, not as obvious as other types might be. So
I see. Well, listen, let me ask you this, Alan. In your tenure for the next year as ABI's president, in what direction do you want to move ABI?
Well, the ABI is going to be going through some changes. We've gone through changes in the last decade. But one thing that we have always tried to do, and being a consumer representative, I'm very happy to be able to do, is to invite and encourage more participation by the consumer bar. We have the consumer report coming out now, so that's going to generate a lot of opportunities to talk to consumer professionals. But I also want them to know that there's room in the ABI for them. There was room for me. There's plenty of opportunities for consumers to participate, to write, to become involved in leadership, and to have a voice at the ABI. And I want them to understand that we want that, and we want them to be as involved as they want to be.
Well, you're right about that, because I think many folks in the bankruptcy community view the ABI as serving only the Chapter 11 corporate reorganization bar, but in point of fact, half of the programming at ABI events is consumer.
And let's not forget that the majority of bankruptcies that are filed are consumer.
Far more
we
than
have
a
a
majority.
we have a very vibrant consumer committee that's open to anyone that's an ABI member. They're very active, but again, that's where our future leaders come from our committees. So I encourage anyone who is a consumer practitioner to get involved in that committee.
Well, and indeed, that's really borne out in my daily column, because much more than the majority of my writing is about consumer issues, not reorganization issues. And ABI, I think, actually very effectively serves the consumer bar. And so I trust you'll be successful.
I agree, we do, and we will, and we will continue.
Yeah. Well, listen, Alan Beckett, I thank you very much for your time. I am really excited about following you over the next year, because you'll have the opportunity to be speaking at virtually every ABI event, which means you're going to be on the road every 10 days to 2 weeks for the next year. How you and your family survive, I don't know, especially your legal practice. But
I have good partners, I will say that.
Well, you're going to need it, because your life is going to change. I guess what, tomorrow night?
Tonight, I
Tonight?
think, yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
That's
I
right.
forgot what day it is. So listen, thank you very much. We very much appreciate your contributions to ABI, and I'm going to have a lot of fun watching you speak over the next year all around the country.
Thank you.
So until next time, we'll sign off on this ABI video, and we hope to see you again soon on another.